In this week's episode of Higher Learning, I speak with Victoria Russell, formerly Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Beam Suntory and formerly of Papa John's. She has so much to share, everything from walking into a big PR controversy in your company, stepping into a new organization and learning what they are really about, and also insights about the exodus in the DEI space. She has so much to share, and I was so excited I got a chance to talk to her. She's been taking a mini sabbatical, and it sounds like a lot of reflection has been really good for her. I can't wait for you to hear this episode and the discussion with Victoria. Welcome to another episode of Higher Learning. I am your host, Rashid, and today we are joined by a very special guest. We are joined by Victoria Russell. She is the former Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Beam Suntory. How you doing, Victoria?
Doing fantastic. Glad to be here.
So I'm so excited you're here. Let's give a little bit of revisionist history here. The first I heard of you is when I did a podcast with Rich, formerly of Papa John's, and we were talking about throughout his career, people that he's coached, that he's worked with. He brought up your name, and I thought it was a great story. And then your pod, the pod was released, and you wrote a post about it and how excited you were about it. And I thought you wrote such an eloquent and amazing post. I commented on it, and I said, by the way, I'd love to have you on the episode sometime if you'd like to come on. And boom, here we are. So I am so appreciative of you coming on. And I'm so glad that he told that story. I want to dive right into it. So like we talked about, that came up in the previous podcast, but he was a manager for you at the time. And this is when you were first moving into the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. So this is also, from what I remember and what we've talked about, this was a little bit of a crisis point at Papa John's at that time when you stepped into the role. So I'm just interested, can you tell us a little bit about that transition into DEI and then what was going on at Papa John's in particular that kind of made that such a sensitive time to step into that role?
Yeah, so up to that point, I'd actually been with the company almost 12 years in previously a marketing analytics role, and started to do more around what's happening with our consumer when part one of the controversy, as we sometimes now refer to it, is called, where he made some unfortunate comments around the NFL. And so that kind of started my career path on the D&I route in terms of joining the committee, being head of the D&I committee. And I'm very big on not reinventing the wheel. So I had a lot of great former colleagues from Brown-Forman and Humana and other companies that really helped, what should we do? But I was still in my marketing role at the time. And then later in that spring, the company decided to create this position. First, it was just a diversity manager type position in the company, and I was going to be reporting to Rich. And so I actually reported to him for just a couple months. Incredible experience with Rich. He's been a life coach, if you will, and mentor ever since then in 2018. But there was a lot going on. And then part two of the controversy occurred with the unfortunate comment on an earnings release. So, I'm sorry, they were doing a media training and whatnot for him. And, so we all kind of heard the story, and it was a really troubling time to work there, but definitely, while one of the hardest career moments in my life, also one of the most rewarding by far.
Sure. It is like a superhero origin story, though. You're like just mild-mannered Victoria working in marketing analytics, and then this event happened, this seismic event happens, and you step into this new world and this role, and you obviously have risen up to become Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Beam Suntory. I think that's fantastic. It's just so funny to find out. I ask a lot of times people about their journey, their career journey. How did they get into what they're doing? I'm going to give you the award for into 2024 Best Origin Story of how you got into the space that you're in. I really love that. I have to imagine, I remember reading it in the news. I remember looking at it and saying, my goodness, this is not good from a public relations perspective. I had to imagine it was a little bit of not a little bit, it was a big firestorm in a very visible way for the company. I have to imagine there was a lot of people in your ear saying, Victoria, what are you doing? Not only just working there, but actually becoming like the face of DEI for this business, right? And they had to have been, kind of looking at you with a little bit of a cross eye, like, are you sure is this the right thing? So I'm just interested, how did you know that this was the right role for you and the right timing for you?
I honestly, I really didn't. I've got a lot of great mentors in my life, in my career, and really started to learn the power of yes and saying yes to opportunities. Building that village around you, I think, is really, really key. There were so many others that helped encourage me, help prepare me, help be there just to be an ear, at times. And so I definitely did not come into this alone. And also during that time, my mother had stage 4 ovarian cancer and passed away. And so it was a really troubling time all around for me personally and professionally. But my mother, she was a great mentor, a great coach for me in life. And I could always hear her voice that, you can do this. You can do this. You don't need to fake it till you make it. That's where you build the village and learn. Like, ask the questions you don't know. And so I didn't feel like I had to kind of be something I wasn't, right? I just could bring my whole self to the table, and leverage all the great people in my network to kind of help build the confidence to do this role. And Rich was definitely one of those people.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you, I really admire you. I mean, it goes beyond unfortunate comments by kind of the leader of the company, but the reality of the situation is that you were standing up for others in the organization. You knew that organization very differently, and that did not reflect the organization that you worked at. And you wanted to stand up and you wanted to be somebody to kind of champion what you really believed the values of the company were, even though it was being, described much differently at the time. So I totally admire you for that. And I really admire people that walk into the fire. In fact, let me hire 100 people like that. People that you want to, when adversity strikes, is when character really shows and they walk into the fire and they're ready to fight, and stand up for what's right. I really admire that. And I love that about you. And that, I just think it's such a great story. So I appreciate you sharing a little bit about it.
I I appreciate that. I think, I heard that a lot, you're running into the burning building. Why? When I look back, I was already in the burning building, right? I
Mm,
knew the people, I was one of the people, and I could tell a story others wouldn't have had that intimacy with the organization to do. And I knew the organization was a great organization, right? And the people in it, our franchisees, the employees. And at that time, no one was telling our story, the 120,000 team members that represented the brand all around the world. This was the acts of one person and not everyone. And so helping people to see that as they would boycott the brand, you're hurting, your neighbor who probably owns a store around the corner from you, right? And so people didn't have that perspective. They often, in times of cancel culture, right, it can be awful, but you know, one of my mentors would always say, never waste a crisis. Right. And so this was an opportunity to step in when no one else was. And, I would do the best I can. And if it didn't work out, it didn't work out. But luckily it did. And I learned a lot from that experience.
Yeah, and I'll dive into that real quickly. I know that you were working even with the CEO at that time, and I know you did some you stood out and gave some statements at the time, even though people weren't sure if that was the right move. And I think that really helped move the needle in the right direction and start to kind of change perception. Did you have anybody in the company come up to you and say thank you for this or I appreciate this? Like I'm just interested, like what type of feedback you got from people inside the organization when you were being so strong in this really not great situation that you had nothing to do with outside of working at the company and wanting to help change the perception.
Yeah, I did. I got a lot of great internal feedback from all four quarters of the organization. It was really inspiring and encouraging. And many would say, you're saying the things that others can't say or too scared to say, or thank you for defending the rest of us, right? Thank you for saving my business potentially, right? There were so many things that I didn't even realize the impact I was having just by having courage and confidence, in myself and what I believed in. Um, I believed it was going to be okay, right, for the rest of the organization. I wasn't sure how. And that's where leveraging again your network, mentors, et cetera. We can do this together, right? I wasn't in it alone. There was a lot of great leaders in the company, all kind of rowing in the same direction, but we had to get the business back on track. And we
I
did
love
it.
that. I love that. Very serious topic, but a little quick aside. Did you ever meet Shaq? Did you ever get involved with in Shaq
Of
in terms of
course.
coming into this? Okay. How
Of
is
course
he?
I did.
How's he
So
in person?
he's amazing. It's actually a great story. Through that journey, I actually brought on our first Black-owned multicultural agency, Nimbus, and through Nimbus, actually introduced us to Shaquille, which is an amazing opportunity. I think initially everyone was super excited to bring him right into the brand as the face of the brand, but we collectively said no. Let's hold off. I think it was a great decision. He came in as a franchisee first, owning 9 stores in Atlanta. He then came onto the board, and then into the marketing. I think that was the right steps for us. It wasn't an easy journey, to put them in that order, but it was absolutely the right thing because we didn't want to tokenize him in any way, right? And so I remember the first time getting to meet him. He was sitting on a stool meeting the executive leadership team. Huge, enormous personality, but as a person as well. And I remember when he put his hand out to shake it, it was like me, like, "Hello, it's so nice to meet you, sir." Right? Huge. And
Can
so
imagine.
yeah, but he
I
definitely
love
brought
that.
fun back to the brand. It's a pizza company. It should be fun, and he would say that all the time, and he brought back a lot of positive energy into a really negative situation.
Yeah, I had my fair share of Shaqaronis after that, so I noticed it, and I thought that was awesome. So then you worked at Papa John's. I love pizza, and then you later went on to work at Beam Suntory. And so for those who don't know, those are the makers of Maker's Mark and Jim Beam, two of my good friends. And you came in as the Chief Diversity Officer. So how did they find you? What was that hiring process like?
It's an interesting story. So I wasn't actively looking at the time, but one of the recruiters reached out, told me about the company, and it initially was just Beam Suntory. And I thought, who is this? I'm not really familiar. I had to do a little research and was like, oh wow, these iconic brands that they have. And I'm born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky, so you would think I would know, but the connection wasn't there at the time. But the story of how they found me was actually a great one. I was speaking at a conference for PwC CEO Action, and the head of HR at the time was in the audience during my presentation, and she was moved by it. When they created the role and position, she told me during my interview process, I sent the recruiter to come find you, and here I am. And so it was an amazing process going through it. But I think for me, what closed the deal, the CEO at the time, Albert Bellotti, he talked about his true passion, his personal passion around DEI, and you often don't hear. I've heard CEOs talk about D&I in all the right ways, or so it sounds. His was truly authentic. I believed him, and I thought, yes, I definitely want to work at an organization when the CEO is this committed to the work. So that's definitely what sold me.
I love that. What was your proudest accomplishment in that role and at the company?
There's a lot of things. I think one of the biggest pieces the CEO kind of charged me with is getting diverse retention in alignment with
Mm.
everyone else. Right, we weren't retaining diverse talent at the right rates, and seeing that happen. And so, building those personal relationships with people all over the organization was definitely a first step in doing that. Building trust again and what the leadership was doing was really important to me. But other projects like pay equity initiative that we launched, an external assessment of all of our talent data to really go beyond the feel good, fluffy part of D&I would say, around trainings and employee resource groups, which is great work. But I think where the rubber meets the road is the analytic piece. And my background in marketing analytics was able to kind of come through at that point, but really understanding, what's happening with the talent life cycle from applicant to termination. And what are we doing? Where are there potential gaps? Where are there opportunities to improve? And doing a lot of that work is definitely one of my proud accomplishments.
That's awesome. So I've said a couple times formally of Beam Suntory because you decided to take a little bit of a mini retirement for the past 6 months, which I know a lot of people want to do that. They either don't have the means or the capability or the courage to do it. So I'm just interested, what led to that decision for you? And what have you been spending your time doing with 6 months free in the middle of the prime of your career? Like, what are you doing with that time?
I'm doing a lot of things I never could do, and really taking care of myself, my own mental health and well-being. The D&I space is a tough one, right? It's not easy, and we're seeing so much of what's happening now. Actually just had the opportunity to speak at South by Southwest this week about the mass exodus from DEI, whether it's the leaders, companies walking back their commitments, things like that. And you could a lot of my fellow colleagues in this space, we could see the writing on the wall long ago of where we were headed in this work. And I had to take a bit of a intermittent retirement, if you will, a pause, a break, to rest and restore and recover and recharge the battery. And I think often we don't get that opportunity. I think we wish for it. But if you're burning the candle at both ends, you're just going to be a puddle of wax, right? You can't pour from an empty cup. And so stepping back kind of out of the fire, recharging the battery. I even contemplated, do I want to stay in D&I right now? Right? It's a really tough space to work in, but I could still hear my mother's voice, the passion inside of me. I definitely want to stay in the space, but I think I'm better coming back better, stronger, more resilient than ever by taking a bit of a break. So
Yeah,
it's
I want to dive into that a little bit because I'm super curious about this. Because obviously, as we look at the last 4 or 5 years, obviously DEI was on the tip of everybody's tongue. It was one of the biggest priorities of every company back in 2019, 2020, 2021. And then I do feel like, you've noticed a little bit of the pendulum swinging, and I'm not really sure why. And I'm just interested, what did you talk about on the panel? What do you see? What is with this exodus? What do you think is going on?
I think there's a lot at play. I think there are probably a lot of organizations that got into this space because everyone else did, right? Everyone's putting up the black square, everyone's leaning into George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And I think some companies did that and really didn't know what they were getting into. Did they truly believe in the work? Are they truly committed to the work? And I mean, beyond just the talk, are they walking the talk? And so I think we've seen some companies step back. This has been an opportunity to say, hold on, let's pause, and then there are those organizations that are going to stay committed, that are going to still do the work, but they might be a little quieter, right, about
Mm.
the work. We've seen a lot of budget cuts impacting D&I first. We've seen organizations like Zoom eliminate their entire DI team. They did share, though, in their news article that they still want to prioritize the work. We're seeing a big shift, and I think this is what they're doing. I'm not sure, but outsourcing it to consultants. So a lot of D&I leaders that have left the space are doing their own thing because either they were in an organization that really wasn't doing the work, or they weren't able to really do the work that they had been kind of charged with, and so they wanted to step out of that. Many are exhausted. And then the threat of legal, ramifications is very real. So,
Mhm.
we've seen all the legislation that's passed. I think there's 81 bills right now across 28 states. There's a lot of concern about, can we get sued? What's going to happen? And so I think you're seeing a lack of confidence for some organizations that are stepping back or being overly cautious right now, because the legislation that's passed is primarily impacting higher education, so not
Mhm.
corporate. But I think there's still that fear that's very real for companies. So they're kind of hitting a bit of a pause.
Yeah, seeing that in Florida, I'm seeing that in different corporate organizations. And just the way I look at it is, DEI is an important thing. And I think that you always want the right person for the role, but you are really doing yourself a disservice if you don't have diversity of thought, diversity of experience. I say this all the time. Your organization demographically should reflect your customer base.
It
Otherwise,
has
you're
to.
not going to be able to speak to your customer, know your customer. So if your customer base is very homogenized, then that might mean one thing, but most of us are trying to gain as much market share as possible and work with as many different types of people as possible. And thusly, that should be reflected in your organization. Now, to me, I would want to hire people that have that as a part of their business strategy, right? And that's part of their priority, right? And that's something that they're thinking about and doing as they hire, as they develop, as they retain. And one of the things that I've always tried to talk to customers about is one of the best ways to do this is by starting at the top of the funnel at the end of the day, right? When you have new grads, when you have, and we've been fortunate enough to do a lot of campus recruitment work with HBCUs, go to events like Grace Hopper, find women in technology, like doing these different things to get people into the beginning of the funnel, right? To give them opportunities as they grow. And that's always to me a great way to get diversity intrinsic in your organization. But at the same time, there's a lot of great people at the senior and executive level too. And yeah, for sure, sometimes it's harder, right? If you're looking at it from a talent acquisition perspective to identify those people, to build those pipelines, but it's worth it because of the things and the value, and I believe bottom line impact it can bring to a company. Just interested in your take there. Like, is that anything I say that sounded out of pocket, or am I looking at the wrong way? What's your take?
No, I'm with you. I think we say it's harder at the top, right? At the top of the organization. I honestly disagree. If you know where to look and you
Mm,
have diversified your recruiting ability, I don't think it's nearly as hard as people make it to seem. I do
agreed.
think, and I always quote Brian Stevenson with Equal Justice Initiative. He said, "You can't have if you don't have proximity to difference, right? That's so critical that you have that, and so you can't." The actual quote is, "You can't have empathy for what you don't have proximity to." So if you
Mm,
want to diversify your pipeline and your talent, what's your proximity to that? What's your proximity to difference so that you can do that? So I think that's critical for the talent pipeline. I think where D&I goes beyond what typically sits in HR or legal compliance work is what you just said, understanding the consumer base. Do we represent the consumer base? So often my kind of lens around DEI strategies is in three buckets: your workforce, that's your people; the workplace, that's your organization, the culture of your organization; and then marketplace, how's it showing up on the outside? So, if you're doing a lot of external recruiting efforts, but your marketing doesn't attract diverse customers, you're probably not going to attract diverse talent to want to work for a brand they don't consume. So I think it's a bit of a cycle
policies.
and how you do that. And so I think it's critical that DEI is embedded across your entire organization, your supply chain efforts, right? Do you have diverse suppliers on board? It touches everything. And so if you want to recruit diverse talent, they're first, you're going to recruit them as consumers. And I
Yeah.
think that's really important.
Yeah, I think what you said is spot on. I think the only thing that I was trying to reflect is that I think we agree that historically opportunities for disenfranchised groups have not always been as available as they are for
No,
others, right?
no.
And so when you're looking at like when we do recruiting, right, and a lot of times we're working with clients around trying to help find great diverse talent in addition to great just overall talent. Sometimes where we have to go, where we have to look, that proximity you bring up, right? We have to go into avenues that we may not otherwise have, just because I just think historically sometimes those opportunities have not always been afforded. But my gosh, sometimes doing that is really worth it, and you can really find
Absolutely.
great talent. And that's what we do as an organization to try to help clients, because to that point, a lot of times they don't put a lot of thought into talent acquisition. They don't put a lot of resources into it. They don't put a lot of, they just want great people at their doorstep, especially when they're working with a company like us. And so sometimes from our perspective, we have to go and do that deep dive and that digging to find that. But I think the work is important. Maybe hopefully it's being reframed in a way, but it's still going to be a priority and impactful. And I think for those companies that made those decisions because everybody else was doing it and they wanted to, look like their contemporaries, like I think that's unfortunate because I think it should have been something you started thinking about in 2019, 2020. It's to be something that's intrinsic and you genuinely believe the bottom line impact that it can have on a company. I know I feel that way. Now, of course, I am a minority owned business and I've seen it myself and I've experienced myself and I've seen the value of it. I'm very proud of our gender and racial diversity and all the different demographics we have at this company. That's because my customer base is reflected by that too. And so at the end of the day, it's always made sense for me. So I'm hopeful for you that next opportunity is going to be there. So I'm interested. You said you were doing a lot of reflecting. What does it look like for you now that you've been able to kind of decompress? What are the non-negotiables as you take that next step, looking at a company, looking at leadership, looking at, a new role?
I'm glad I kind of took the break because initially I thought, I'll jump right back in. And no, I have a lot of great mentors and my coach that I work with to take the break. What do you really want? What do you don't want? Even more important. And for me, now that I'm casually getting back into the search, it's really important to me that the leadership is committed. And I mean, walking the talk, not just, oh, this sounds good. We want to put a diverse face on the team or the website, things like that, but really understanding it, how committed are you? And what does that mean? And how do you show up and demonstrate courage and confidence at a time when so many aren't? Are you truly living the values you say you have? And so, during these interview processes, it's not just them interviewing me, I'm interviewing them as well, right? To make sure that we're aligned. Because I don't want to find myself in an organization that had great, the speech, their notes were great, but yet they're not really living it. And that's a hard move when you make that choice and you find out, no, this is not exactly what I thought it was. So that's really important to me. Valuing my mental health and well-being is even more important to me now than ever. I think historically I've always just thrown myself into work and work was everything. And I didn't have a truly good balance between who is just Victoria and this work side. And at the end of the day, I'll be honest, I'm just trying to get into heaven. It's not about the next job, the next company. I learned so much as my mother was, in her final days of what's really important. I want to be remembered for the impact I have on someone's life at the end of the
Mm.
day, right? Not how much money you make, not the title you have. None of that matters in the end. Will people say, wow, knowing Victoria made my life better, right? Having her as a mentor or advisor, whatever, did that improve my life in some way, in some meaningful way? That's what I want. That's the non-negotiable for me now.
I love that. You got some incredible balance and insight. And it sounds like your mother was so impactful
Yes.
on you. And I'm so glad you had this time to reflect. I want to ask you because we might have people listening who are either diverse themselves or they really value diversity. And, a lot of companies have a lot of the things on the website and they'll have, they'll show their leadership team and it's very intentional. But to your point, might not be like how they operate, how they live. What would you recommend to somebody who's going through an interview process to really truly get an understanding of if that's important to an organization or not? Do you have any kind of tips or things that you do?
Yeah, I mean, I talk to people. I leverage my LinkedIn network at the organizations that I'm interested in. I read about what they write. I look at what people from the organization write and talk about. Does it truly seem genuine? Do the employees celebrate and talk about the great work of the company, or is it quiet? Is it crickets chirping? Like that's something I think is important to pay attention to and leverage your network to understand what am I getting myself into before you get there. But allowing also the space for you might get to a new organization and it's not a good fit. And it's okay to leave, right? I think these days we get so committed. I just need a job or I want to be attached to a certain company or a certain brand or whatnot. I think taking care of you first is really important. You're going to spend most of your hours with this organization. So you really want to make sure, kind of like dating, right? It's a good fit for you and hopefully a long term good fit for you.
You took the words out of my mouth. I'm probably using the analogy too much. Jackie's probably annoyed with me about it. But what you were describing, just in terms of like wanting to be associated with something, it's like a lot of times it's like telling your friend, it's okay to be single. You don't need to, your identity doesn't need to be tied to another person or another company, right? And it seems like you realized that over these last 6 months as you
I
kind
have.
of reflected. That's awesome. I
I've
want to
been able
ask,
to embrace who is
go ahead.
just Victoria. Just Victoria,
Who is
absent a title, absent a company. Even when I'm networking now, I don't lead with titles or ask about titles. I want to get to know the person. I want you to get to know just who I am, right? Versus, I think so often we hide behind those labels and they've become our identity. And I think it's so important that we separate. I don't think that's healthy. So I think it's important that we can separate that. You can still add value and contribute to great organizations, but it doesn't need to be who you are. I think
Mm.
those should be separate.
I gotta tell you what, our good friend, mutual friend Rich, he is a executive coach. You might have him on life coach though. I mean, this might be a thought. You might think about this because you've got some really prescient things you're saying here that I think will really resonate with the right people. So love it. I gotta ask you, I know you did some traveling in this time. What was your favorite place you went to? What was kind of the place that you have the best memories?
I took my first solocation, I called it, to Isla Mujeres. It's a little island off the coast of Cancun. Loved it. Because it was secluded, it was quiet. I felt like I could kind of escape the normal touristy kind of spots that you normally go to. I am definitely a warm weather and water girl. And so I loved it. And the most important questions people ask you at resorts like this on vacation is, how's the temperature of the pool water? What cocktail are you having? Like that's all people would ask. I got to literally just be Victoria. There was no networking and all that. Like it was great. And so for me, it was very therapeutic. I got to spend time just with myself, enjoying my own company, which I realized I'm a lot of fun, to hang out with. But I
Love
loved it.
that.
It was great for me. And now, I could take a trip anywhere alone and go have a blast. So that's
Feel
definitely
good
been a
about
great
it.
experience.
What's your weapon of choice when they ask you what kind of drink you're having? What would you order if you're by poolside?
I'm a truly inclusive cocktail enthusiast. So I actually drink everything. The only thing I
Appreciate
don't
that about you.
drink. I love wine. I love, all kinds of spirits. It just depends on the mood I'm in. Usually in warm weather, I love gin or vodka. Of course,
Okay.
the
You're not
tequila.
you're not going like strawberry daiquiri pina colada, or are you going for more like a traditional mixed drink?
More traditional or just neat on the rocks. The older I get, the sugar doesn't love me as much anymore. So
All right, I can't. I'm gonna. We'll talk about this afterwards. I'm gonna be heading to Louisville sometime in the next few months. We're definitely getting together. We're gonna get some. We're gonna get a
absolutely.
drink on the rocks. All right. So let's talk about hiring because that's why we're here. You've done a lot of hiring throughout your career. I'm sure you have some very fundamental things that you believe. So I want to start there. What is a core philosophy, core hiring philosophy that you have when you're bringing people into your team, into your organization?
We hit this a little bit earlier, but diversity of thought is comes from diversity of representation,
Mm.
right? So, really understanding a person through the process, their background, their experiences, are they able to add value in ways that others that you currently have on the team don't? Do they have skill sets that you don't? I think, as a leader, something I look for is skill sets and differences that complement me. I'm not looking for another Victoria, right? There's one Victoria. So, and she's here. So, but when I look for other talent, I really want to find people who will push and challenge me, people who will ask great questions and very thoughtful about it. And so I think asking the right questions to get at that in an interview versus some leaders surround themselves with maybe yes people that just nod and agree. And so how can you grow your function or your organization when we're all in agreement all the time, right? I think there's respectful ways to do that. And I think that's really important to kind of seek out when you're interviewing talent.
I love that. Do you have, if I asked you about a memorable interview experience, maybe you were interviewing, maybe you were interviewing somebody else, what comes to mind?
This last experience with Beam Suntory was definitely one. I felt like they put a lot of time and energy into the variety and diversity of people that I met. So I got to meet with senior leaders of the organization, those that led the employee impact group work. So all kinds of people throughout. It gave me a great kind of lens of what I was walking into. But like I say, that final interview with the CEO was the game changing for me. Just how passionately he talked about it, how authentically he spoke of it. He still maintained a bit of vulnerability, which is not common in CEOs, but he's definitely was a seasoned one who's kind of been here before type that was comfortable in that. And that's uncommon, but a highly attractive quality of a leader. You don't have to know everything. You just have to know how to find out what you don't know. And he definitely had that inquisitive nature about himself. And so I think learning now, I will say, during the whole process with him, he had a great game face. At no point did I know what was gonna happen, what was he gonna say? And this is when I was leaving Papa John's and I had to, accept or, take the voluntary severance. And so I made that decision on a Monday to leave Papa John's. I had the final interview with Albert that Monday, and it was very much a jump and the net will appear. And that's kind of how I live my life, right? And that Friday is when they called and extended the offer. So I was like, this is fantastic. So
Believe in yourself. It's fate. That's
yeah,
amazing.
absolutely.
I love hearing that. What's the favorite question you like to ask in an interview?
Actually, my favorite question is when you get to the end and ask, is there anything else, any other questions you have, anything you want to share with me? Because
Yeah.
that pushes the person, usually in the interview, they're all buttoned up or prepared. They have their handwritten questions and they've attacked all that. When you get to the very end, it pushes you to kind of, what didn't I ask? Or what do I wish I want to tell them that maybe we didn't cover? That I always find an interesting question at the end because it digs a little deeper into maybe what they weren't prepared to share.
Yeah, and listen, I'll tell you why I really love that. If you think about when you've interviewed or when people are interviewing, we talk to lots of thousands and thousands of candidates a year here, and they're always trying to convey something about themselves. Most people are going into an interview saying, I want to come across like this. I want to come across that I'm a fit for this role, whatever it may be, right? And sometimes, because most interviews are being guided by the hiring manager or the person who's interviewing, so they're really driving the bus on what the topics are, right?
Mm.
And so you're trying to answer those questions, and maybe if you're savvy, you can interweave some of the themes that you wanted to get in there into that. But sometimes you get to the end of the interview and you're probably thinking in your head, I didn't really come across with how committed I am, or I didn't talk about this one initiative that I really wanted to bring up that I think is super relevant. And by leaving that door open, now you can give them a little bit of closure to say, you know what, I want to get this out on the table and I want to put that out there. So from the candidate side, I think that's a great thing to do. And I would recommend every person interviewing does that. What about you did we not get to that you want me to know? And I
Mhm.
find that you are going to hear some very interesting and great things. You'll also find out about what they prioritize about themselves and how they want to be identified as a professional potentially working for your company. So I think that is awesome, awesome stuff. How do you give a candidate an experience that helps them understand what it's like to work for Victoria or to work at a company? What do you do in the interview? So I'll give you an example what I mean with that. So it sounds like Beam Suntory brought in a lot of different people, right, into the process that probably told you something about the company, right? It's inclusive here. They want to get a lot of buy-in. They want to show different parts of the business and give me different perspectives. So you could probably take that away from that process, and hopefully that was what it's like when you started working there. What have you tried to do to kind of give an idea of what it's like to work for you, work in the organization that you work for?
I share a lot on social media, obviously, particularly LinkedIn. And so I found a lot of candidates, especially in this day and age, did a lot of their research and could see my view of the company based on what I would post. And I think,
Mm,
younger generations are definitely doing that. They're either more mindful about what they post, how they post, what they talk about, but you can learn a lot about how people think looking on platforms such as that. So I think that's always become known that, your companies kind of do the research and candidates do as well. But that's one thing I was big on is sharing kind of my perspective about where I work and what I was doing and being as authentic about it as possible to convey the truth because I noticed other candidates that weren't even applying for roles on my own team would express, oh yeah, I follow Victoria and I saw this or I saw that. And it was something I encouraged all employees to do, talk about the company. It was a great recruiting vehicle for the organization as well when people could see people just like them sharing what they thought or what their experiences have been. So it's like a peek inside outside of what's put on the website that has already been kind of, cleansed and washed and whatnot. But you get a more authentic opinion when you do that, looking at what other employees of the company talk about. So I always advise people, when you're looking at roles, look up the company and see do you have mutual contacts that work there or used to work there, right? They're going to be the most authentic and honest. So it's a great way to do some research on the culture outside of what you're going to be told during the process.
yeah, love that. As you know, we're connected on LinkedIn. I too post quite a bit on LinkedIn, and so if somebody wants to do a little research on me, they can find out what's important to me. But also, I think it's important to push your employees to do the same to give a view of the company. Sometimes when people leave and if they get reached out to, we actually had the candidate do that a couple of years ago. You're going to get a mix. I mean, you're obviously going to get different perspectives, right? Usually, if somebody's left, maybe it's on bad terms, maybe it's not. I've had people reach out to people here at our company and on their own and solicit advice, and you might be connected with something on LinkedIn. I totally recommend that. Hey, listen, we are going to do the same thing on the hiring side. If you can find a soft reference, somebody that's worked with so and so before, you probably should ask because you're probably going to get some good insights there. So I agree with you. I think that's a good idea. When you miss on somebody, because we all do, can you trace it back to something? Is there something like a theme that you might have done? Maybe like you were moving too fast, or maybe you didn't articulate the role well enough. Like, is there anything that comes up as a theme that if you miss on somebody, you can look back at?
I think it's a great learning opportunity, right? So when you make a hire that you're like, I didn't get this one right. What did I not ask? What was not demonstrated? What maybe did I pay too much attention to and other elements not so much? But sometimes, interviewing is not easy, right? You're not going to see everything. It's kind of on the first date, so to speak, right? You're not going to catch everything. But I think it's really important for leaders, say you made a bad call, not to just dismiss it and eliminate the person. How can you help them? What are they lacking that you can be supportive of? What training aspects? Is it a coach? Is it something in a particular discipline? How can I help? And I think so often people just say, oh, this was not a great hire. And they kind of slowly exit the person versus trying to help them. Because you can learn a lot about how to coach and develop others on your team through maybe ones that you might not have made the best decision on when you hired them, right? And who's to say they can't rise to the occasion under great leadership? I've seen a lot of people flourish under great leaders, and that's something I work on every day to be myself is, how can I be great for someone that years later, they look at me the way I look at Rich or other leaders that I've had the opportunity to work with that let me rise to the occasion and help give me courage and confidence maybe if I was lacking that or in other aspects of the work.
I love that. Out of curiosity, when you're interviewing, are you like taking notes? Are you like typing into a technology? Are you like, what's your kind of your process when you're interviewing? Is it just trying to build a rapport and then remember the feedback after the fact? Like, how do you kind of keep up with yourself in regards to the questions and the answers?
Yeah, definitely the rapport and eye contact. I'm more of a note taker because I find it when you're interviewing, and I've done group interviews with people too, that if they're taking notes on a computer, it can be distracting for the candidate. So,
For
especially if you
sure.
can almost hear it or they just have their head down and you feel like it's like, yeah, I don't like that. I don't like how it feels on the other end. And I've seen it when interviewing someone else taking notes that way. So I don't recommend that. I think it's natural to assume the person you're speaking with is going to take some notes, but not like a
Mhm.
full blown, dissertation of what you're saying. So
Sure.
that's been my kind of process. And then just to kind of build the rapport, I think is so important that the candidate have a great experience because that's also representative of the company. You could have a great recruitment experience with a company you didn't get the job for, but it was a positive experience. And I love when people give feedback to candidates, especially after, if they don't get the role, what could I have done differently? How could I have been a better candidate for this role? Is there something I need to work on? And so some recruiters do a great job of passing back that feedback, but hiring managers can do the same.
100%. Jackie, I got an idea. I think that if we can create a software where somebody can just actually video interview and there can be a transcription with generative AI helping with the answers and the questions being generated so that we get great feedback and you can build that rapport, that would be amazing, wouldn't it? I hope somebody builds that sometime soon. I'm sorry, shameless plug. Had to take the opportunity. So Victoria, I want to jump into a couple other things. I want to talk about some day in the life stuff. So I know you're currently in between roles. What are you doing like right now, right this week? What are you doing right now that's giving you life? Are you doing like yoga, meditation? Are you journaling? Are you spending time with friends? Like I know we talked a little bit about the travel and things like that, but I'm just, what's getting you up in the morning right now that you're excited about?
So having this time to focus on my family and friends has been a true gift, right? My church, I'm very active in. So just being able to prioritize that for me right now has been amazing. And then staying involved in things. Like I often hear from people, they're like, if I didn't know you left your organization, I would think you were still actively working, which is great that I can still stay engaged in the space. Whether it's doing speaking engagements, whether it's mentoring others right now, I'm doing a lot of coaching others. So just staying kind of active, making sure I keep my chop strong for when I get back, into the game. But the beauty is being able to prioritize my time how I choose, being able to get more rest than I normally would. And also not being as caught up in the day to day of what's happening in the space. I, obviously stay connected and have conversations with people all the time, but it's not my fire to put out at the moment, like directly for an organization. So that's actually been nice to kind of sit back and not be in that day-to-day fire of what's going on in the media, what's going on in, world news, and just be able to just be Victoria and have my personal opinion on things. Because I think when you're in the chief diversity role, you're always speaking on behalf of your organization, and you often don't get to be who you are or
Mm,
feel how you feel because you always have to kind of put the company first, the people in the organization first, and so often you come last. And I think that's what's really exhausting in the D&I space for sure. Almost to say it might be one of the hardest jobs in an organization right now, besides the CEO, because it's emotionally draining. It is not a 9 to 5. It is a 24-hour job. Employees want to, you become the employee voice, the champion, and they want to talk to you, but not during work hours. They want to talk after work, in the evening, on your personal cell phone. Like, and so it's really draining and time consuming, but it's also so great to feel valued in that way, to give back and help others. But sometimes you got to pause and put your own oxygen mask on, right? And take that break for yourself. So I think a big learning for me is how to have better kind of time management of all of those things so that I don't lose myself again when I get back at it.
I love that. Superheroes got to put their capes up sometimes too, right? Yeah, it can be exhausting to keep fighting the good fight on the behalf of so many others. And you know what? It's also a job that I gotta imagine it's hard to have a defined success goal. It seems iterative and it's always evolving, and you're just that's got to be too. It's like I just okay, got to this, milestone or did this and got this good feedback, but gosh, got to move on to the next one, move on to the next one. And so it must feel like this insatiable type thing sometimes in terms of really taking an organization to another level because there's always an opportunity to improve. There's always an area to get better at. Have you read any good books that you want to recommend? And if it's not a book, maybe tell us some content, maybe something you've been watching on TV that you really enjoy that you want to share with our listeners.
Right now, because the space was so heavy, I've actually focused mostly on music, things that
Mm.
lift my
Oh,
spirit.
I love this. Give us some
Many
music
Yes,
advice.
many don't know this about me, or many do. I'm actually also a Zumba instructor. And so I've been instructor for 10 plus years now. I don't currently teach, but I still go to conventions. But the music, I love to dance. My favorite is anything in Afro beats, reggaeton, salsa, all of those. And so that's why I love to spend a lot of time in tropical places. The music just,
I was gonna say, should I be coming to Louisville or should you be coming to Miami? Now Zumba is down here,
of
right?
course, our founder is there. Yes.
Yeah, and so that was a client of ours at one point, and I really loved their mindset from a marketing perspective because everything about working out previously from a marketing perspective was it's hard and it's like fighting through adversity and lifting weights and all these things. And they instead focused on this is dancing, this is fun, this is like enjoyable. Like look forward to exercise. It's not something to not look forward to. And so the way they positioned that I thought was brilliant. And I think it's exciting that you've been doing that for 10 plus years. That's got to be a big part of your identity and who you are.
It is. And one thing I love about Zumba, music is kind of at its core, and it's a common language for all of us. And so often I love the conventions I go every year. It's in Orlando in August, and you meet, thousands and thousands of instructors all over the world. And while there's definitely a language barrier, right? When you bring so many different people together, we can all dance together. And
Yeah, I was
so
gonna say, then the reggaeton comes on and it's like we're
oh,
talking the same language.
yes, and so I've loved that about it, and it's exposed me to so much diversity from a worldview than just what we might experience here in the US in different pockets. So it's been a great experience and I love it. And it's been a great kind of decompression, getting your endorphins up, dancing, but music is definitely my happy place.
I love that. We talked a lot about posting on LinkedIn. I have a post here from 8 months ago. I'm just going to leave this right here. Black Executive CMO Alliance. No, it's a very
Yes.
diverse picture. What can you tell me about what this moment was and why you enjoyed it so much?
Yeah, so we had an opportunity to sponsor Becca's summer meeting out in the Hamptons. It was beautiful, but it's bringing in all these CMOs from a diverse background at one table to just commune, to talk about the space. So while I'm not a member of Becca, I got to attend a lot of their obviously the social events and be the spirit of choice there, which is great. But that picture, that table was iconic. If you look around, like who's in it, it's almost too many to name, but I wasn't sitting too far from Carolyn Wanga, the CEO of Essence, so many other kind of heavy hitters, the new CMO of Taco Bell, like, and just everyone could just be themselves in a safe space. Again, there's a lot of pressure being black, brown, etc., in these high powered roles. And it's a chance to kind of let your hair down and commune with one another. But it was so amazing to be a part of. Jerry DeVard, who leads that, is an incredible leader, and it was just great to be connected with that group.
Fantastic. I love that. I love the story behind it even more. All right, last question. If you have one bit of career advice to offer 20-year-old Victoria that you didn't know then, but you know now, or maybe for any of our early in career talent listening to this podcast, what would you say?
It's kind of two parts. I would say don't be afraid to say yes, but know your boundaries and when to say no. So one thing I've learned in my journey, the power of yes was kind of step one, not being afraid, saying yes to my first speaking engagement long before I had to do it. It was like 10 months out that we planned it, or maybe 8. And I did a few mini ones to kind of prepare myself, but I was terrified. Now I love it. I love it. And I'm so glad having that mentorship was there. But then later, understanding that no is a complete sentence. Knowing what you value, you'll learn that over time and it'll get kind of refined. I think over time, setting boundaries and no is okay. No is a complete sentence. And I think that's definitely something I've learned. I didn't want to kind of start with the negative, but I think that's important to set those boundaries. And then lastly, mentorship, critical. Like really, it's a saying we all know your network is your net worth, but I believe that. I am so thankful to be surrounded by so many brilliant people that, truly care about me and have my best interest at heart, who really believe in lifting as you climb, I think is so important. So, that's something for me that advice I would continue to give.
Your network is your net worth. I love that. I really love that. Victoria, I have loved our discussion. I think there's so many great insights that came out of this. Thank you so much for joining. Looking forward to following the next steps in your career. And we'll certainly keep updated on that. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.